Why is the unconscious so reluctant to talk to you in language?
Hi everyone, let's get started. I've always moved back and forth between film and TV, right? Like sometimes all I want to do is be in the cinema, I want to watch old movies, I want to watch the newest films that have come out, I want to go alone, I want to go in groups. But then there are other times I love just being in front of the TV, right? Like I love rewatching old favorites, immersing myself in something new, catching up on things that people have recommended that I've let sit on a list somewhere. And lately I've been in a TV phase again. I've been revisiting some past series. I've been catching up on some new ones, and I've been thinking about the different ways in which I think TV shows end, particularly the endings that seem to hurt the most, and kind of why they seem to hurt the most. I think it's fair to say that different types of TV shows lend themselves to different types of endings. And so before like diving into kind of these heartbreaking endings that I've kind of got an analysis for, I wanted to like talk about a few broad categories. Bearing in mind, this is not the only ones. These are just the ones that I'm seeing from my perspective.
Do you really think all this is an accident? That we, a group of strangers, survived? Many of us with just superficial injuries? You think we crashed on this place by coincidence? Especially this place? We were brought here for a purpose, for a reason, all of us. Each one of us was brought here for a reason.
The first is what I'd like to kind of like talk about is the hero's journey, or like a mystery driven show. These are shows that essentially just ask the question, what's going on? What's going to happen? Will the protagonist find what they're searching for, what they're reaching for? The show is built around an answer, and the ending arrives once we've reached that conclusion. I think clear examples of this are things like Lost and Prison Break, and even a show like How I Met Your Mother, even though they kind of carried on after we met her. But still, that felt like why we were ending the show. All these shows have destination baked into their premise, whether it's like solving a mystery or resolving a quest or just fulfilling some sort of narrative promise. And so the endings of these series then are often mostly judged by the way they provide closure. An obvious one is a show like Lost, which leaves people deeply divided. The journey was emotional, but the ending has to bear the weight of all of the questions it was trying to answer. I think it's only now, when we look back like 20 years ago, that we can really appreciate what that journey was about, and we strip ourselves of worrying about the ending so much.
We get to start over. We're the ones who live.
I think then there are shows where the ending is dictated less by kind of narrative structure and more by like external factors, primarily the audience, the cast, and the crew. These are usually sitcoms or kind of long-running dramas, so your Grey's Anatomies, your Walking Deads, I think Scandal was kind of in there. I even think like an anthology like American Horror Story feels like that sort of example, as well as sitcoms as well. I think that these shows don't have a single clear endpoint when they begin. It's more that viewership declines, or the creative team feel like they've run out of stories to tell, or the cast, so many of the cast have moved on, and even then people tend to get cycled out. And you can sort of see that on The Walking Dead. They've had so many different behind-the-scenes crews. Characters who should be alive based on the comics didn't want to see out the full run. I think it's a real case of the well has run dry. By the time these shows end, there's often a sense of fatigue from the audience and also from the people making it. I think that whilst there are, diehard viewers that will mourn the loss of that show, I think that many of the viewers who started that journey won't see it through to the end. And even those that will have a sense that they're ready for a new story, they're ready for new characters, they're ready for a new motivation, for a new journey.
And I knew that if I told you what happened, that you would never believe me.
I believe you.
Another category that consists for me are like creator-driven shows, and these are some of my favorite. These are those shows where you can clearly tell that there's a singular voice behind this who really feels like they want to decide when this is going to end and when they feel like the story is complete. I think these shows don't necessarily end because of ratings or because of any external pressures, just because the creator feels it's time. I think that Atlanta and Leftovers are really great examples of this. You know, the people behind those shows had something very specific to say about a community or a place or a time. And when they felt that that thing was done, they just closed the book. I don't think these shows necessarily provide closure in a traditional sense. When I think about Atlanta, when that show ended, I didn't really look back at it with sadness or mourn the ending. If anything, it's like you view the whole thing with admiration as a complete and quite remarkable piece of work. I feel the exact same way about The Leftovers as well. It's not to say that you can't get emotional about those things, but I'm not sure that's sort of the goal of ending that story.
I love that I got to be with you guys.
Gay.
You saved my life and changed it forever.
Gay!
I think then there are shows that break your heart, right? I think these shows do something very different to the series that I've mentioned. I think some shows, I think The Leftovers and I think Lost really flirt with that approach, but they have other things that they're dealing in. And so ultimately it's the ones that I think commit to it fully that can be quite devastating for an audience member. I think that what these shows do is that they introduce you to a way of life, right? To a rhythm, to a set of relationships, to a world that feels lived in, even without your characters. And then slowly and inevitably, it tells you that way of life has to end. I think these endings don't just mark the conclusion of a story. I think they kind of force you to say goodbye to a period of time, much like in real life.
If you guys happen to know all of those really pretty girls out there who have like jobs and purses and nice personalities, those are not my friends. Not you guys. I think we should all just agree to call it, okay? Great.
I think they remind you that things just can't last forever, and that unfortunately change is inevitable, and that in order to begin a new chapter, you have to close the previous one. You might not relate to the character's situation specifically, but I do think you relate to the feeling, right? This sort of bittersweet realization that a phase of your life is over. I think a few shows have done this really, really well. I think Girls is a great example of this. I think the Community was, Justified, Insecure, Mad Men, Broad City, all kind of delivered endings that felt like a farewell to a time and to a place and to a way of being. I think it's fair to say that not all shows end at the end of the series, right? Some sort of gear up to it a few episodes before, but some you can really notice that the ending is coming almost a season or like 2 seasons earlier. I think that I want to talk about and pinpoint exactly where those moments hit for me in some of these shows and why they feel so devastating as they then roll forwards to the end. So there will be spoilers for this, so use the chapters below if you want to skip, if you're either watching one of these shows currently or haven't yet seen it and you don't want the ending spoiled for you.
Let's get lost tonight. You can be my white Kate Moss tonight. Play secretary or the boss tonight. And you don't give a fuck what they all say, right? Bow in the presence of greatness.
So I've talked about this before, but I think that Girls has one of the clearest endpoints for me. I think there is a moment where you know there's just no coming back from this. Everything is about to shift. The chapter has to close. These people are going to be moving on. I think some might say it's when Hannah gets pregnant, which feels appropriate. Some might say it's when she gets the job and has to leave New York. That also makes sense to me as well. You could argue for a few different turning points, but for me, mine is this.
Thanks, thank you.
Hey. Hey. I
I think the moment that Hannah discovers that Jessa, her best friend, and Adam, the love of her life, are dating, I think the way that she reacts, that silent devastation, the desperate attempt to hold it all in, it's to me the clearest signal that this way of life is done. This friend group can't really recover from this. You know, the dynamic they've had for the past 5 seasons, it's been held together with chewing gum and shoelaces, but it's over now. This moment actually happens towards the end of season 5, but you could trace the beginning of that back further to Jessa and Adam's initial attraction.
I can't.
I remember the first time I saw this scene and I just went, oh no. You know, not oh no because I thought it was wrong, and not oh no because I was even worried about how Hannah was going to react. Just oh no. This is it. It's over. I knew the story was ending. And I think the show knows it too. Listen to the score. There's that twinkling piano. It's like a familiar but slightly off-kilter melody. We've heard it right across the series at pivotal moments. It's like the show is gently warning us. Everything after this feels like one giant long farewell tour to these characters, to their way of life, to something that once felt permanent but never really was. And if you've ever had to move on from people, or you've had to watch as people move on from you, you'll know how this feels.
Remember that conversation we weren't gonna have?
No! Ah!
This is it. Your pawn shop owner's dead, along with his flunky. I found another one in a shallow resting spot. I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit, because I know it was you that called the shot on me, Duffy. I know, just like I know it's no accident that Emmett Arnett and his assistant are missing. Look here. Next one's coming faster.
Okay, next I want to talk about Justified. I'm going to say, if you haven't watched this show, skip this section and go watch it. It's one of my favorite shows of all time. I love it. The writing is phenomenal. The leads, Boyd Crowder and Raylan Givens, are two of my favorite opposing characters ever, I think. I adore this show. And for me, the ending is signposted really clearly in the very first episode of the final season with the death of Dewey Crow. By this point, we already know that Harlan County, the town that most of the show is based in, is dying. The show has told us this in every way possible, but despite that, for 5 seasons, it's fought in many ways to keep this place alive, through the people, through the conflicts, through its twisted sense of justice, and then Dewey dies.
You, think he was a rat for the Federals?
I think I couldn't trust him anymore.
I feel like the moment that trigger is pulled, the moment Boyd casually says to roll him up in a carpet and get rid of the body, Harlan, for me, feels like it's finally dead. I think the characters and the stupidity and the chaos, the tense and tangled relationship between the Lexington Marshals and the hillbillies of Harlan, it's all heading for one final bloody confrontation, and you better get out of the way. And at that point, it doesn't really feel like it matters who lives or dies. And to be honest, maybe no one gets out of this alive. What I do know, what mattered to me, was that the joy I had in discovering this world all the way back in England that feels so far from my home here in the north, that joy is over. Harlan is too poor, it's too desperate, and it's time for everyone to leave. And I think where Girls was about saying goodbye to one another, Justified is about saying goodbye to a place. It's about leaving behind something that has served you in its own way, but knowing that to grow and to get more out of life, you have to move on. I think even people who stay in one place know this feeling, the kind of quiet awareness that staying means you can't go. There's a line from one of my favorite books, Light Years by James Salter.
For whatever we do, even whatever we do not do, prevents us from doing the opposite. Acts demolish their alternatives. That is the paradox.
Staying means you can never leave, and leaving means you can't stay.
Hello?
Beth? It's Peter.
I know who it is.
I want you to get on a train and meet me in the city.
Anywhere.
No.
Okay. Just a minute.
What do you want?
Nothing. You came over to me.
You opened the door.
So, Mad Men is a show that I find myself coming back to every year. It has a fascinating endpoint because ultimately I think the show is constantly running towards it while the characters are constantly running away from it. And this push and pull makes for a real fascinating kind of set of scenes, particularly towards the end. The characters spend years trying to stave off the inevitable, which is being swallowed up by a kind of corporate machine, resisting becoming like the competitors that they despise. They're like cowboys, you know, in the Wild West, that they're pushing against the tide of civilization. The whole thing kind of reminds me a little bit of Red Dead Redemption 2. You know, that game captures this sort of creeping sense of modernity. You know, you're riding through a frontier that feels untouched, but then all of a sudden a train track cuts through the land. Or you pass a town that's way more built up than it was earlier in the game. Change is always behind you in that game. It's catching up. It's the true villain of the game, not Micah. Mad Men feels the same to me. The characters are constantly having to find these like elastic and temporary solutions to avoid stepping fully into a world that they're not ready for and that they don't want to be a part of. And when it finally happens, when they're finally swallowed up, when the world we've known does at last seem like it's coming to an end, it doesn't just feel inevitable, it feels like an exhale. It feels like a final breath. If I had to pick a single moment that defines this, there are plenty to choose from. There's Don watching the plane fly by right before he runs away. There's the death of Bert. There's the moment he and Peggy refine their friendship. But for me, the moment is this one.
Hold on. This is the beginning of something. Not the end.
Money. Throughout the show, drastic change has always been met with Don Draper's greatest skill: persuasion. He convinces clients, co-workers, himself that there's another way forward, that there's another reinvention waiting on the horizon. But this feels like the first moment where Don's silver tongue fails him. This is the first moment where no pitch, no charm, no last-minute maneuvering is going to turn things around. The game is done. And I think as soon as those characters turn their back on him, we know it too. Everything is going to change, and there's no coming back from that.
Fuck them kids! Elijah! What the hell is wrong with you? You told me! Issa, what the fuck? You want something too?
I walk around like that bitch.
Okay, finally, I want to talk about Issa Rae's Insecure. The way this show ended feels really different from all the other examples that I've given. I think the reason for that is that Insecure feels like a show that is always about growth. Yes, it explored so many things, you know, LA, black womanhood, relationships, friendships, career struggles. But I think at its core, it was always about forward motion, right? Like season after season, we saw these characters evolve in ways that to me felt intentional, felt tangible, and felt real. And felt intentional not only from the characters, but from the people writing those characters. When I think about other shows and how they concluded, and they concluded brilliantly, I love them, but I don't necessarily feel like their characters have completely ended the cycles that they keep seeming destined to repeat. You know, we've been watching them move through them for years, and I don't trust that that's over just yet. Don Draper is still ultimately the Lothario we know him to be. Hannah only really has Marnie around her, and she's ultimately a train wreck still. And I think Raylan and Boyd seem destined to do battle forever. There's still uncertainty. There's still a lingering sense of unfinished business. But with Insecure, something about the way it wrapped up feels reassuring. It feels complete. You know, friendships endure. The central relationship we began with finds its way back together again. But this time it's healthier. They're both stronger. They've got better boundaries. There's a feeling that whatever happens next, these people are going to be okay. And for me, the moment that signaled the show was ending was this one.
I'm not ready for the night to end yet.
Tonight made me happy.
You make me happy.
What sets this apart from all the other endings I've discussed is the presence of dialogue. There's conversation. They communicate not only to one another, but to us, the audience. They say things, you know, they tell us things. When I look back at those other final moments, they hinge on something unspoken, something seen, something shown. It's the heartbreak on Hannah's face. It's, you know, it's the co-workers turning their back on their leader. It's the death of a character. It's an action. It's a choice. It's a physical shift. Even in Mad Men, Don is trying to say something, but the show is loudly contradicting him.
Hold on. This is the beginning of something. Not the end.
And so, because Insecure was all about growth, about making it visible, about making it known, it makes sense to me that a moment highlighting this impending ending wouldn't rely on silence or implication, but on words.
And once you get to the limits of our language, we have reached the limits of our thought.
So this has all got me thinking about Wittgenstein, the philosopher, Ludwig Wittgenstein. I've been quite fascinated with his work ever since I came across this lecture by Michael Sugrue on YouTube. Wittgenstein wrote a book called the TLP. He essentially constructs a series of arguments around the philosophy of language, and it's sort of read as a set of statements, 525 statements. Each one is commenting on the ones before it. So essentially he has 7 propositions, and then those 7 propositions, there are comments on those propositions, and then those comments have comments, and it ends up looking like a big map almost. But his final proposition, proposition 7, it has no commentary. It's the only chapter of the book that's only one line, one statement. It has no commentary, no follow-up. It simply states, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. I think that Wittgenstein understood that some experiences, some existential, some metaphysical, the ones that brush up against the very nature of humanity and the universe itself, they can't be fully captured in language. They exist in the space beyond words. They are beyond articulation. They live in the body. I think that's why the endings of shows like Mad Men and Girls and Justified and Broad City and Community, it's why they feel so heavy. I think that the transition that these characters are making are the kind we don't recognize as life-altering in the moment. You know, a single heartbreak or a moment of loss, an act of ambition. It's only much later that we understand how much these moments shaped us. And when something is beyond our full comprehension, beyond words, it manifests physically, in a glance, in a turned back, in an empty space. But Insecure, it ended in a place that felt fully human, fully understandable. There was no grand existential shift, and there was no sense of ineffable loss. It was just people talking and figuring it out. And for once, that kind of felt okay.
Why is the unconscious so reluctant to talk to you in language? And so one day I was dumping the trash, and I thought, oh, I know the answer to the problem. The answer to the problem is just simply, language is very recent, 100,000 years maybe. It's an eye blink. But the unconscious has been there instructing you and helping you along for, a million years or more. So it's just not used to it. It's used. They didn't have any language. It had to show you pictures and stuff. Right. And that's the way it's used to informing you. And this new stuff, it's not that sure of.